My presentation today will be very simple, and I will be dealing with 3 points only. First of all, I wish to say something about how we conceive of the field of global mental health and its differentiation with public health and with international health and the different flavors these words convey. And the second point is I am going to introduce you the term bioethics, although I'm sure you know of it already, but I wish to draw your attention that the word was coined precisely in relation to the ecological interests of both the Lutheran pastor Fritz Jahr, who coined the term in 1926, and to Van Rensselaer Potter, who revived the term in the 70s of the 20th century. And the third part of my presentation will be on suggestions to discuss on how we could use bioethics or the bioethical discourse to address some of the issues we have been listening to. First of all, we have come to the conclusion, actually, that most of the problems in global mental health are not to be addressed simply from the standpoint of Western, or as Charles Leslie, an anthropologist whom I knew quite well, used to say cosmopolitan medicine. Cosmopolitan medicine was Western medicine, and we are used to the differentiation between the West and the rest. So we try to impose to other people how Western medicine deals with problems. So we suggest to Pakistan, for instance, that they should increase the number of psychiatrists in a country with 100 million people and 150 psychiatrists. The advice of the World Health Organization is increase the number of psychiatrists and you will be better off. That, of course, is a sort of strange advice from an international organization. I was a staff member of that organization for quite some time, so I know very well what we do when we draft recommendations. So the first idea is that public health is not the same as international health. International health carries a connotation of a sort of imperialistic or colonialist idea. International health was the health of those people. Tyler would have been dealing with those faraway people. You are international when you go there and you keep safe, so you have to be aware of the dangers there, dangers coming from the environment, coming from the people or whatever. International health carried that connotation. So we try to avoid that with the term global. And I wish to suggest that global does not only mean geographical or planetization of health, but also global in the sense of being holistic, or I mean all aspects of health are interrelated. And the global health and global mental. No health without mental health, by the way, is how Lancet entitled a series of papers of bringing psychiatrists to a very good mood, because some people contend that psychiatrists are no longer necessary. You could either be subsumed in neurology or internal medicine or whatever, social sciences. Now, I wish to draw your attention only to 3 main points in this dialectics between the West and the rest. And those we usually phrase with the term gaps. We have many gaps. The 10-90 gap was very popular some time ago. It says that 90% of expenditures in health research favor only 10% of the world population. And that's very interesting. It's a good idea to discuss later on. The other gap is the no-do gap. Well-to-do countries, the haves, they do possess knowledge, but not that knowledge arrives to the people who might need it. So we know a lot. I mean, when we say we, it's also a trap, a linguistic trap. We are not all the same group, of course. We are we and the others, no? We know a lot, but we do little. The no-do gap is a very important gap in the field of mental health. The other gap, I think Marmot was coining the term, the treatment gap or the health gap. It's the same as the no-do gap. We know a lot, but we do less than we should. And the reason for that is not only a technical problem, it's also a moral problem. And that's the point I wish to make and to emphasize. My second point deals with what is bioethics. Bioethics, as we used to define it while I was at the Pan American Health Organization, was the use of dialogue to formulate, to frame, and to solve dilemmas arising from the use of technology and science in the context of human affairs. The use of dialogue to formulate and to solve the dilemmas. And what is a dilemma? A dilemma is a problem, the solution of which is another problem. That's a dilemma. For instance, air pollution is a problem. And what do experts do? They restrict your use of cars. In my country, for instance, nowadays we cannot use our cars 1 day a week. So it's another problem. The problem is not solved, but the solution entails another problem. Those are most of the kind of problems we face in the field of health. Now, the use of dialogue consists always in considering the others as equal in the right to say things. A professor I had in Germany, in Heidelberg, Professor Gadamer, was an expert in ethics, said, well, ethics is a very simple matter. It only consists in considering the other as having right, as being right when you are not that sure. So that's, the idea of dialogue was important. And the term originated in a Lutheran theologian named Fritz Jahr in 1926 at the time of the Weimar Republic in Germany. And he defined bioethics, he was a good reader of Kant, of course, saying that was the way of respecting life in all its forms. And then Van Rensselaer Potter, an oncologist in Madison, Wisconsin, said bioethics is a bridge to the future. We have to be solidarity. We have to show solidarity with other species in order to survive. He called bioethics the science of survival. He was influenced, of course, by the ecological thinking of the time. Rachel Carson had published that important work on Silent Spring. Aldo Leopold, who was also a good introducer of the world, the global bioethics idea. So that was the main thrust of the origins of bioethics. But then it was somewhat medicalized, and due to the influence of Georgetown and other universities, the word became some sort of variant of biomedical ethics. And that's the reason why we have two strands. One is the ecological ethics, and the other is the medical ethics in the word bioethics. Now, if we consider this as a use of dialogue to formulate and to solve dilemmas, some of these dilemmas you cannot solve, but you can dissolve them in the higher ideas of living together. Now, what are the uses of global bioethics nowadays in the field? I can identify 5. First of all, there is an idea of regulating delivering services, regulating. And most of these regulations come in the form of international declarations or covenants. For instance, UNESCO issued in 2005 the universal, UNESCO always uses the term universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights. And you see there how vulnerability, we're all vulnerable in some way or another, can be a principle of moral reasoning. But now, regulation. Most of the regulation are soft law. That means they are not binding to the states sign them. So, but regulation is an important aspect of bioethical thinking when we deal with global mental health problems or with global problems in general. The second use of bioethical discourse is oversight. You have not only to formulate regulations, and you have to avoid moralizing. Most of the time when we see people talking about ethics, we encounter people moralizing about what we should, what we ought to do, what we ought not to do, or what we should avoid, or whatever. Moralizing is always easy to do. You find philosophers who have no idea of what does it mean to do field work under difficult circumstances, moralizing about what we should and what we should not do with experimenting with human subjects, for instance. So that's a big chapter in this problem. But oversight does not entail moralizing, of course. That's the main point that we should do. For instance, the responsibility principle promulgated by some interesting author, but it's not that what we need. We need dialogue in order to see what people actually do under different cultural or political or economic circumstances. So first, regulation, second, oversight. The third use is deliberation. We have created, I mean, when I say mean, of course, you understand that it's not always a personal matter. The committees had, the bioethical movement created a special institution called the Ethics Committee. Institutional review boards are called in one country, but they're the same. What the committees are is not just a group of persons, it's a group of, when you join two modes of moral reasoning, what the Germans said, Verantwortungsethik and the Gesinnungsethik. That means the ethics of responsibility, when you are accountable for your own decisions, and the ethics of your convictions. And you bring them together into an ethics committee. Some people get there with the Bible in the hand, and they think, well, the Bible is good, it's a good book, and you should all work and live in accordance with this book. And then others bring the Quran, and they think, of course. And we all have a private moral, and a private moral life, and we have to deal, that's the dialogue. The dialogue is between my own convictions and the responsible decisions I have to help to make. So deliberation. Then the next use is interaction. Sometimes you have to take decisions that you are sure will not be accepted by the people. And that's the responsibility where you have to interact with people. And the last use is compliance. Whenever I go to places and see that you have to comply with some regulation in the field of health, you have to help people make a right decision without moralizing, of course. That's one of the dangers we have when talking about morals and ethics, is that we start immediately moralizing and saying things we don't believe, but we have come to think that they are good for it. That's the reason why I believe an important concept we developed while I was a staff member of the PAHO, of the Permanent Health. It was the notion of ethical sustainability. Ethical sustainability. Not only economic sustainability, as we heard before, and we usually associate the term sustainability with economics, with growth, with, let's say, progress, and with globalization. But ethical sustainability, that's a word I would like to offer you, to offer that for discussion, actually. Well, I was remarking the other day that the Spanish language has an advantage. And when we speak of sustainability, we want to say two different things. An argument will be sustained by good reasons, but it's also sustained in the long run. So there are two different ideas. In Spanish, we have two words. We say sustentable and we say sostenible. That's two words address these two different meanings of the word sustainable. That means good arguments behind, but sustainability in time, also in the long run. So that's the idea, actually, what I would like to propose. And last but not least, a friend of mine, Professor Hans-Martin Sass from Bochum, coined the term differential ethics to refer to a very simple issue, to the point that ethics is always local. The motto of the World Health Organization, as you know, is think globally, act locally. That's a very good idea, of course, and we don't always respect the idea, but ethics is always local. That means that we have to have some sort of cultural competence to deal with the different environments we are working on. And he coined the term differential ethics as a resemblance of differential diagnosis in medicine. So we have to be careful to see what is common and what is different and proceed in consequence. But the idea behind it is that you have to work in context, not in a relativistic fashion that everything goes, but it contextualizing what a practice might mean for the people involved. And that was for Hans Martin Sass the idea to develop an instrument which we could incorporate into the clinical history of people. He called it the axiogram. Axiogram is the graphical depiction of the moral universe of people. So you have a good depiction, and you can add to the hemogram or to the electrocardiogram or to the electroencephalogram. So at a glance, you could have an idea of the moral world of the people in front of you. As an idea, it's a very good one. The problems are only practical application as well. It's usual. So in summary, the problems of inequality and iniquity, which we have heard before, are for us a very important issue. I used to refer to them as gaps. The gaps I already mentioned are just a few of them. The 1090 gap, the no-do gap, the treatment gap, the health gap, whatever. We have to try to solve them. One of the ways of solving those is to recognize that they are not technical problems, but also moral problems. And what is moral problem addressed in this way is through the bioethics discourse. And the bioethics discourse is just the use of dialogue. It's not a monological ethics, it's a dialogical ethics. And bioethics started as a contribution to the world problem of the ecosystem. The pioneers were always very aware of the fact that the humanity ran the danger of destroying the environment. And so ecoethics was the key word at that time. I don't know why then the discourse turned otherwise. And then finally I have suggested 5 ways in which the bioethics discourse can be used. This is regulation, oversight, deliberation, interaction, and compliance. And the final idea is how to reach an ethical, sustainable proposal without being, without moralizing, without entering into that cheap way of thinking of ethics and morals. Well, thank you very much.